Welcome to the CHCH Newsmakers podcast. I'm your host, Rick Zamperin. If it is making news in Hamilton, Halton, and Niagara, across Canada or around the world, we're going to tackle it here on Newsmakers. Sports and gambling, they've gone hand in hand for decades now, but recent scandals have pushed this delicate relationship to a tipping point. Dr. Mike Naraine is an associate professor in the Department of Sport Management at Brock University and joins us on Newsmakers. Mike, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks so much for having me, Rick. Happy to be here.
How close are we to a tipping point when it comes to the relationship between sports and gambling?
Yeah, specifically here in North America, it's a pretty big, we're reaching that tipping point. We're seeing and hearing a lot of these news stories come out, whether it's big names like Shohei Ohtani or we'll call them bench warmers like Jonte Porter, Hall of Famers, Chauncey Billups. The names keep coming out of the woodwork, and it's not because these things aren't happening. They are happening, and there's more scrutiny because here in North America, we've invested heavily into the sports gambling paradigm. And so, are we at a tipping point? Yes. And what it's really showing us is that, we're at a juncture where it's still the wild, wild west when it comes to sports gambling here in North America, specifically in Canada, and that we're not doing a good enough job when it comes to research and education for multiple stakeholder groups, including athletes.
One of the most sacred things about sports is the integrity of the sport. You go to a sporting event, whether you're in the stadium, in the arena, watching from home, listening on the radio, whatever you're doing, however you're consuming the sport, the integrity of it, not knowing how it's going to go down, who's going to win, it's the ultimate reality television, that is sacred. Are these scandals damaging the integrity of sport?
From a public eye perspective, absolutely. And I think, even from a business perspective, of course, the perspective I come from is that sport is business. And we're seeing a lot of private equity being poured into sport because sport is a unique asset class for the reasons you just mentioned, Rick, that you don't know the outcome, and that irrationality of fandom, the fan psychology, really, is the accelerant that allows the sport industry to continue to grow and not achieve stagnation. But when that comes into question, when that, intangible feeling, that irrationality, that fandom level starts to decrease because you feel like things are scripted, or because athletes are throwing the game, or coaches, or referees, or any element that could potentially water down and dilute the product and that sentiment that I've referred to, that's problematic. So, is this a 99.9% of the system is broken? No, but there are gaps here that are clearly visible. Athletes don't know what the line is. Of course, there seems to be a hard line. There is some education with respect to the athletes saying, hey, don't gamble. But in other respects, that message isn't being presented to them, but also the sort of indirect conversations that they might have. Athletes are human. Referees are human. Coaches are human. And they have downtime periods, whether it's on the plane, on the train, on the buses, planes, trains, and automobiles style. And so, there's going to be the offhanded conversations. And that's where some of these things are manifesting and circling and coming to a head. And so when you've got these backroom poker conversations, you've got these backroom, hanging out, drinking, smoking, and then, someone happens to mention, hey, the next game I'm not feeling it. Maybe I'm just going to throw it. Ha ha. Those might seem offhand, but again, they really, a jab at the integrity that is the sports system.
I read a stat the other day that in 2018, legal gambling in the U.S., and at that time, not every state, and still not every state allows gambling, but in 2018, Americans gambled away or spent or invested $5 billion. Last year, that mushroom clouded to $150 billion. This is big business.
It absolutely is. And those are the American numbers, Rick. Even here in Ontario, with the most recent Blue Jays run here in the World Series, you're talking about an Ontario impact from a sports betting perspective with casino bets as well. But online gaming was about $9 billion worth of gross gaming revenue. And so that's or sorry, I should say gross gaming revenue, but $9 billion worth of bets placed. Like, that's a lot.
Yeah.
And what it shows is that this is not new behavior. It's just increased accessibility. And, if you think about the paradigm before, you had to go to your local corner store here in Ontario, you had to fill out the bubble sheet, and you had to play on Proline. Mm-hmm. You had to bet parlay style, so you had to bet at least on 2 outcomes to come true, and for both of those outcomes to happen, not just one or the other. Now, in this new paradigm, you can choose one game, one event, one activity, whether it's a prop bet, like, I think Austin Matthews will score a goal in this event, or I think the Blue Jays will beat the Dodgers. But you can also do it on your phone. You could do it on your tablet. You could do it on your computer from the confines of your own home. So, the thought process of, I have to fly to Vegas and do it brick and mortar style, or I had to, play blackjack at Fallsview Casino here in Niagara, or I had to go to my local convenience store to play Proline. That paradigm has been disrupted by the digital gambling space. And so you're seeing a lot more 19, 20, 21, 22-year-olds here in Ontario, kids who are in college and university, who are more risk tolerant than risk adverse, who would never walk into a convenience store and think about betting on Proline. They're more interested in going to the convenience store and getting a Red Bull or buying a chocolate bar or something. But now just being able to wake up in the morning, 8 a.m. before they go to class and jump on their phone and set their bets for the day, their sports bets, that is. And if they really get bored, they can gamble in the online casinos. That's where we're getting this. Again, the accelerant here is the accessibility of this opportunity. And it's not to say that this is a bad thing, on face. Because again, sports gambling and gambling in our society has been going on for hundreds and hundreds of years. Mm-hmm. It's out of the shadows though, and out in the open. What we need to be doing here is practicing and preaching responsible gambling. And that comes with the investment, not just taking 20% taxes here in Ontario on the gaming revenue, but investing back into the system with 1 to 2% back into addiction and mental health, because there's been increased calls there, Rick, as well as, we've got a robust research environment here. We've got researchers at Brock, at U Windsor, at U Ottawa, at Toronto Metropolitan. What are we doing to activate those researchers and find out the nitty-gritty granular details so that we can make sure this is a sustainable marketplace? That's how you do good business. You can't just say you're open for business if you're just going to allow the wild, wild west to take over. You have to make sure it's responsible and sustainable.
Here's another interesting wrinkle in this whole discussion is that sports leagues have partnerships with legal gaming websites or applications or whatnot. Is this a sticky wicket?
It is, but you can't really fault the farmer for wanting to take more seeds to grow some crop. And ultimately here, this is the balancing act for the leagues and the teams and even individual athletes, is how do they balance revenue generation and making money, income, against the ethics and morals of sport integrity. And that's we've seen this, especially coming out of COVID, that sports teams, leagues, and entities like even athletes as endorsers have been looking for new ways to generate revenue. Mm-hmm. And sports gambling has a lot of money in their ecosystem. And if you look at the big fish, whether it's a FanDuel, Flutter, DraftKings, BetMGM, PointsBet, these are big fish in the pond who have lots of money to spend on customer acquisition. And so if you're a team or a league, you're looking at this saying, well, we can't say no. But then at the same time, when these stories come out of the woodwork, it's challenging because you're like, I took money with the left hand, but at the same time, I have to make sure that the core product is still, we still maintain that integrity piece. Otherwise, the entire house of cards falls apart. So all this to say, it is a tricky balancing act. And that's why the onus isn't necessarily primarily on the teams and leagues. It is a flywheel, and it is an all-hands-on-deck approach, or to use another analogy, it takes a village. It requires the government and regulators. It requires the media. It requires government at the federal level, not just the provincial level, but also the sportsbook operators. But again, left to their own devices, they are the fox in the henhouse. They're trying to make money here. It is a business. And so we can't just say, okay, you folks should have responsible gambling advertising, and you teams should go out and make sure that your athletes are well prepared and not doing anything untoward. It takes everyone here if we're going to have both a responsible gambling marketplace that's sustainable, where B, we're proactively educating consumers and athletes, and C, we can ultimately achieve that balancing act of sport integrity with the need to generate revenue in our consumer capitalist environment.
We learned during Grey Cup week from CFL Commissioner Stuart Johnston that there were 5 alerts triggered in the CFL in 2025, and no one was convicted of wrongdoing. It cleared all the hurdles. How are leagues monitoring this?
Yeah, it's a great point, Rick. And the CFL is a really good example. They've got a relationship with Genius Sports, which is a big data company, I should say. And it allows them to, in our recommendation-based society, the algorithms, to identify and flag things as they're happening in real time. Traditionally, things would happen, and then we would do a postmortem and look at things over the past quarter or past month, maybe past week. But now with the big data and technology partners that leagues like the CFL have, they're able to dig in, not just on a weekly basis, but on a daily basis, if not on an hourly basis, and even if they wanted to, more granular than that. And so there is an ability here, and it does exist, not just for the teams and leagues, but specifically for the regulators. The government of Ontario, particularly, I'll pick on them since we're here in Ontario, have an ability to flag and red flag anomalies in the system. And the sports betting operators also have the ability in their own ecosystems to flag and identify problematic gambling. So if you see someone placing bets, their average is $5 a bet here and there, and then all of a sudden you see on a random Thursday at 1 o'clock in the afternoon a $200,000 bet, that's a bit of a red flag if someone's been betting $5 each time, and then all of a sudden they jump up to $200K. Mm-hmm. And that's a red flag that the sportsbook operators are expected to flag and prevent, but they slip through the cracks because, again, they're trying to make money and they want to take those bets. And then the backstop is the government regulator, which says, hey, you know what, we flagged this and you should have stopped that. We're going to penalize you after the fact. Now, whether the punishment fits the crime, that's yet to be determined, and I don't think it is. The financial punishments that have been levied are not commensurate with the level of bets that are coming in for those red flags. But when we talk about the teams and leagues specifically, back to your question here, Rick, for the CFL, they're able to work with their data partners like Genius Sports and say, hey, look, are we seeing any red flags here? Do we see anything? Oh, it's Grey Cup week. Do we see a lot of money being put down on Montreal for some particular reason? Now, that obviously wasn't the case. The Rough Riders did win. But, in the case of, say something hypothetical, maybe the Alouettes, there was a lot of money being put down on the Alouettes. Maybe there was something untoward happening that on the Rough Riders side, that someone said something to someone, again, untoward, and that they were going to throw something or, purposely throw an interception or something to that effect. So all this to say, the framework does exist where if teams and leagues wanted to know more, they absolutely can get that information. It's what they're doing with that information. And again, I just want to make this point very clear. The level of education that the leagues and the teams and even the players' associations are giving back to their players, coaches, officials, it's not enough. And it's not happening to the level and scale that it needs to in order to protect the sanctity of the core sport product. Some of it is happening, but the experts like myself are not being brought in on a regular routine basis across the player associations, the leagues, and individual team levels to really give that sense of comfort and third-party arm's length information and expertise that needs to happen. And if we're going to maintain the integrity of our sports system, that absolutely needs to be happening on a accelerated routine basis.
You mentioned Jonte Porter, former Raptor, who's been banned for life from the NBA. Pete Rose, banned for life by Major League Baseball years ago for betting on games. It seems like the scandals are centering primarily on basketball and baseball. Are they the easiest games to manipulate?
Yes and no. They are the most popular forms of betting if you think about it. Now, if you want to look at North America, of course, the NFL is a really, really, really big dog in this conversation in the yard. But ultimately, here in Canada, the number one most bet on sport is basketball, and there's many reasons for that. But just to truncate the conversation here, Rick, you've got 82 games for the Raptors, but you've also got 32 teams. But then you've got different opportunities within the game. You've got who's going to score the first basket? How many points will there be scored in the first 10 minutes? You've got points, rebounds, assists, blocks, steals. There's multiple variables, which means there's multiple markets and outcomes that can be achieved and therefore bet on. So the more data points that there are, the more opportunity there is to place bets. And again, there is more opportunity to theoretically manipulate, to your point, because while in the NFL, every play is an individual market, fair enough. Same thing is the case in baseball. And so when you're talking about the outcome of every pitch, you're talking about over 200 markets that could be bet on in a game. So yes, I could bet on the Jays to beat the Dodgers, but I could also bet on what the outcome of the next pitch will be. And, we've already heard many scandals come out over the last 10, 15 years. The Houston Astros with George Springer and Jose Altuve, banging trash cans to tip off what the next pitch will be. Well, if someone can bet on what that next pitch will be, that trash can banging isn't just good info for the batter. It's good info that could be theoretically relayed to a sports bettor. And when we're seeing the types of stories that are coming out, the connections between Jonte Porter, Chauncey Billups, some other names that that are escaping me right now, but the connections to mafia and black market gaming, that's also problematic here, because then we're also dovetailing not just sports integrity with gambling, but we're also bringing in, violence and organized crime. Mm-hmm. And that's also a big part of sports gambling and gambling in general, is where is the money flowing through? Part of the reason here in Ontario specifically, we legalized and regulated, we'll call it the distribution of third-party sports betting through the FanDuels and DraftKings and PointsBets of the world, is so that we could keep money here onshore. We could get tax revenue, 20% of that gross gaming revenue, but also so that we took money out of the black market, so organized crime wasn't funding their activities, through this system. And so if we continue down this path, baseball and basketball, to your point, it's not that they were more manipulable theoretically. It's just there's more of those markets to bet on. Football is fun, and football, you can bet on interceptions and who's going to score a touchdown and all those sorts of things. But there's more basketball and there's more baseball markets to bet on. And that's why those are the two most popular sports, or two of the most popular sports in North America to bet on. And basketball, the number one most bet on sport here in Canada. And so it is problematic when we're talking about, of course, we only have one team, the Toronto Raptors. But when we see a Raptor, Jonte Porter, getting caught up in things and being banned for life, he's a bench warmer, but that is, again, emblematic, a symptom of a much larger problem, which is we're not doing enough to educate our stakeholders, including our athletes.
What's amazing, too, and this is more for the uninitiated than anyone else, is you can bet before the game, you can bet during the game. Those lines are always changing, whether it's, is this player going to score this many points? You can bet over that number, under that number. That number is always changing throughout the game. And you mentioned Chauncey Billups as well. Here's a Hall of Famer. He's in the Pro Basketball Hall of Fame, current head coach of the Portland Trail Blazers. The other name, Terry Rozier, who is a guard with the Miami Heat, embroiled, ensnared in this, mafia-laden, point-shaving, illegal poker gaming circle. It's like a scene out of a movie. And here's the other thing, too, is the human element in all this. I think it was Lucas Giolito of the Boston Red Sox, a pitcher for the Red Sox, who among the many meetings that Commissioner Rob Manfred and Major League Baseball did with, from team to team, Lucas told the commissioner that, listen, there's a human element to this, because if we don't perform or we perform above expectations, fans who are betting on the game, who are in the stadium, are now, sending us death threats on social media. Like this is taking a toll.
Absolutely, and it's even, just to pull the curtain back a little bit more, but even from a global, well, I won't say global, but a continental perspective, in the United States, it's even happening with the collegiate athletic level. And so you're talking about athletes, college level kids in Division I schools, playing basketball aged 18, 19, 20 years old who are getting death threats, and people coming onto campus. And again, a different environment than we have here in Canada and specifically Ontario, but still very, very scary stuff. And absolutely, we don't want that to be the situation. Part of this is the human element, as you mentioned, Rick. And I think we have to go back to what I was referring to earlier in our conversation, which is this type of behavior has been going on for some time. I mean, if you think about the popular Netflix series The Last Dance with Michael Jordan and the Chicago Bulls, as a perfect example of how the human element was captured. So, we sometimes put athletes on a pedestal, whether they're men, women, para-athletes, doesn't really matter, but athletes are on a pedestal. We think of them as elite, sometimes robotic, machine-like, laser focused on their tasks, but they are still human. And they go home, and even after the game, they go to the locker room, they go to the bus, they go to the train, they go to the plane, and there's significant downtime. And in that socialized environment, there's opportunities to get involved. There's a lot of card games that happen on planes and trains and buses. There's a lot of conversation that happens about personal lives and, just shooting the stuff out there. And so, when we think about the human element, of course, one of the negative adverse effects of this situation is having athletes, officials, coaches, referees, all these stakeholders who are in the public light being crucified for not achieving certain levels of performance or expectations because certain individuals in the private market, decided to put money irrationally on an outcome that didn't hit. So there is that, but as far as interesting throughput to the conversation, I think we have to, again, not just look at the outcomes, because while those are really, really terrible things, let's not just talk about the outcomes. Let's talk about the throughput here. Athletes have significant downtime. Officials are constantly on the road. Coaches are on the road. They have opportunities to do things. They're in hotel rooms. They're on the road. But they got to pass the time somehow. We constantly, we in the public, think that these athletes and coaches are just working on their craft 24/7, 365. No, they celebrate the holidays just like everyone else. They'll celebrate Thanksgiving. They'll celebrate Christmas and Hanukkah and Ramadan and all these other religious events. They have families. They go home. They celebrate birthdays. And they also hang out with one another, and they will hang out with people who are upstanding citizens and sometimes not so upstanding citizens, because that's who was part of their crew growing up. That's who they believe is part of their core social circle. That's who they entrust with their business affairs. It happens. There's so many stories, time immemorial, of good and bad and ugly as well. And so we can't just say, sports gambling is bad. We need to be putting this sin behind and we're back into a bottle and clog it up. With many other sins in our society, tobacco, cannabis, alcohol, we regulate them. That is the appropriate thing to do. And that is also, from my expert opinion, what we also should be doing, which is what we have done here in Ontario, which is well regulate the space. The problem is it actually well regulated? It's regulated, but is it well regulated? And the answer I would offer today and over the past 2 to 3 years here in Ontario is no. It hasn't been well regulated because the investment, the proactive investment by the government regulators when it comes to research and education for consumers, for athletes, for coaches, for officials, for media, that level of proactive legwork has not been taking place. And the end result, as you mentioned, Rick, are many stories that have come into the media, like Terry Rozier, Chauncey Billups, Jonte Porter, Shohei Ohtani's interpreter. But behind the scenes, we've also seen a significant rise in the number of cases of young men at the CAMH, the Center for Addiction and Mental Health, the number of calls to doctors' offices and the strain that we've seen on our healthcare system from a mental health and addictions perspective has been quite significant. Preemptively to stop that strain on our healthcare mental care system. And again, given where we are today in 2025, there isn't a lot of money to go around for our healthcare system as it is. People know about the wait times. They know about the strains on the system. We need to be proactively preventing that strain or additional strain. And the way to do that is by increasing the tax rate on sports betting and online casino betting so that you can directly invest those funds into research and education for all stakeholders.
It's a great point. We only got a couple minutes left, but I want your honest opinion on this. Seeing that, earlier you're intimating that we're at, or maybe even beyond that tipping point, we're going in the wrong direction. Do you see the potential that prop bets get canceled? Because this seems to be where, athletes are stepping on landmines.
Yeah, it's a great point. I honestly, I don't see it happening. If anything, what we're seeing is a granular nuance of the prediction market, and that hasn't really taken off here in Canada yet, but it's taking off in spades in certain jurisdictions in the United States, particularly where sports betting is illegal still from a state jurisdiction level, but predictions are okay. What's the temperature of the weather going to be today? Is it going to be -5 or +5? What do you think the odds are on that? And so the question versus, we're talking about granular nuance. And so for the uninformed, it's very, very, very specific. But if you do your due diligence on the prediction markets, that is really upending and disrupting the disruptive model of sports betting in the United States. And so we've got a hyperscale level of disruption happening that hasn't yet taken over here in Ontario or Canada. But I suspect as Alberta, as BC adopt Ontario's online sports betting framework, we might see some lobbying for predictions. And so it's only going to get, I'm going to use my words carefully here, but it's only going to get more difficult to navigate this space. So do I think prop bets are going away? No, because even if we put the clamps down on, advertising, if we put the clamps down on, problematic gambling to an extent, I think the exacerbated effect offshore of prediction markets might influence the domestic acceptance of predictions. And we already have that. When do you think the first snowfall in Hamilton is going to be? I was able to bet on that in the last month, and I made money because of that snowfall that we had recently. So, I think you're going to see a lot more of those questions. Who will be the next leader of the Ontario Liberal Party? Stuff like that. I think we'll see a lot more of that. And because we're seeing that, none of what I talked about there has anything to do with sport, Rick. Those are just general life questions. And so sport is, again, just going to retain its position as the microcosm or the conduit to these much larger social affairs, but also that will serve itself as the conduit to casino level gambling, where the margins are higher, the addiction levels are greater, and the harms ultimately are more intense. And so, and extreme. So ultimately, to answer your question and land the plane, no, I don't think the prop bets are going anywhere. So I think that is incumbent. The onus is on all of us to do a much better job of, investing in research and education. So we have domestic level research. So we have finger on pulse of what's happening here in Ontario, not what's happening in Australia or England or Hong Kong, but we have finger on pulse of what's happening here in Ontario. And we make sure that we're raising our hands and saying, hey, we're taking 20% taxes on gaming revenue here in Ontario. Where is that money going? Why aren't we investing in mental health? And so we understand that we're not going to put sports gambling and predictions back into a bottle. But at the same time, what are we doing about the increase in the opportunity for addictions to be greater? And we have greater addiction rates. What are we doing with that 20% taxes? Are they just going to the government? Where is that money going? And then you start to unravel all the other things that happen politically speaking. So all this to say, I don't think micro bets are going anywhere, prop bets. If anything, we're just going to get even more accelerant with this hyperscale of the prediction markets that we're seeing in the United States.
It's a great point. Love the answer. And I agree with you that those novelty bets, whether you're betting on the weather or the Oscars or political positions, that's only, I mean, the audience for that is large. And I think that's the next growth period for these gambling websites. Dr. Naraine, thank you so much for your time today. And we'll certainly touch base with you down the road.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me again, Rick, and always happy to be here on CHGH.
All right, that is a wrap for the Newsmakers podcast. A big thank you to the all-star cast behind the scenes. If you like today's episode, click the thumbs up, hit subscribe, leave a comment as well. Catch the Newsmakers podcast on chch.com/podcasts and wherever you get your favorite podcasts.